Hello friends, Rodge here, aka the Wisco Horn Dog, back again for another Saga Thursday. Today we're gonna take a look at the Saga Storm, which is a event I recently attended in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. I chatted a little bit about it on the recent Paint Challenge update, but for all you Saga files, I thought I'd give a little bit more of an in-depth review of my trip and the event and what could be expected if you were to make it next year. So, yeah, this was the last weekend of September. I rode over with my good main man, Barnaby, and he has a bunch of Vikings that he picked up for Warhammer Ancients. So he was using those for Saga, rebased them to rounds, and we rolled over a day early. It's a Saturday event for the Storm, so we showed up on a Friday afternoon at the Fantasy Flight Game Center. This place is totally awesome. If you've never been there before, you definitely need to check it out. Filled to the brim with gamers of all kinds of miniature games. It's definitely a super cool place. We're going to meet some of our local pals, the Skull Bros Awesome Game Troop. And we got there a little early. It was a work day. So me and Barnaby, we got a game in of his Vikings versus my Anglo-Saxons. So this was a good game for us. He hadn't played in a long time, and this was the first run of actually having all my models painted and using my Anglo-Saxon warband, which is 2 units of levy or feared for the Anglo-Saxons, which is levy dudes with close combat weapons, spears, and shields. And throat's parched. These guys are cool. They're resilient like warriors, but they don't quite hit as hard as warriors, so they're kind of a unique element in the warband. I had 3 points of warriors split up into 2 units of 12 warriors. So 24 guys split into 2 units of 12. And then I had a warrior priest, which was pretty cool. I haven't run it before, but since the warrior priest ability provides a bonus based off numbers, and the Anglo-Saxon warband is all about having big mobs of guys, I thought there would be some synergy there. Also, the warrior priest adds a lot of fightiness to your board, whereas you actually should run them with Anglo-Danes, but the Anglo-Saxons don't have that much fightiness either to gain attacks. It's kind of dice heavy when you get down to it to generate more attacks. So I thought that was a good combo, and our game went pretty quick. Put a pretty good hurting on Barnaby. Can't remember too many of the details, but it was a lot of fun playing on some nice winter terrain at Fantasy Flight Games. We went over to Eric Hagen's house after that, and he is actually one, if not the main man organizer of the Saga event at Adepticon, the Grand Melee. So he's the one who actually provides most of the terrain for the Saga Grand Melee at Adepticon and runs it. So he's cool. He's cool. He's the person providing most of the terrain then for the Saga Storm event. But it's awesome going to a guy's house who is so enthusiastic about the hobby and is so into it and does everything up to a high level. He just has bins and bins of awesome terrain and models. And, he has a long career in the wargaming hobby, so just bins going back 20 years of finely painted models. So super generous of him to put up me and Barnaby and help us out in getting our asses to the Saga Storm. So following day was a pretty nice day. Well, was it nice? Kind of rainy, whatevs. We were under a roof, a pavilion, and that is definitely a cool vibe. I think for Saga, that kind of thing is absolutely perfect. And I think it could work with other games as well. Just being outside is awesome. I like playing outside. I've done it before because you get the game, number one. That's pretty sweet. Number two, even though you aren't doing anything, it sort of feels like you've done an outside activity. You've communed with nature for the day. You haven't really done anything, but it feels like, yeah, I went outside, I did this and that. Even though you just stood there and played some games, you kind of scratched that itch, which is really awesome. So, yeah, definitely a good vibe. It was up in somewhere north of the Twin Cities, Ham Lake or something like that. But, yeah, people just started showing up. Hagen set up all his awesome terrain, and it was a really laid-back vibe. You could pick whoever you wanted to play. There was a loose organization of players split into 4 different teams for the day. So you would keep track of your wins, and there was kind of like a loose overall team winner kind of chicken dinner thing going on there that I was definitely not on one of those teams, but there was that going on. So there was like a little extra to get people interested in doubling down and playing some games. So you could pick whoever you want and pick whatever scenario you want, which was really cool. So first game I played against John Stentz, who's running Scots, and he is definitely a great Saga player, and he's a great hobbyist in general. Back in the Warhammer days, he does bolt action, some kind of pirates games, Flames of War. I think he's doing Wild West stuff too. So he is an awesome dude, and I got to play against the Scots for the first time, which I've heard about these. We had a guy in our local league who was running them, but I never got to play him. So I knew it was kind of a punch counterpunch type of war band, and just from what J-Jack has been telling me, and basically that proved to be the case. We played a scenario from Crescent and Cross that was endless war bands, but basically just slaughter points to see who won the game. You had to win by 4 or 5, and I did pretty well against John. It was super close. The board, the terrain didn't really matter too much, except on one side where most of the fighting was going on. Along that edge, there was a couple of forests, which kind of had an interesting dynamic where if it was open terrain and your kind of resurrected units could pop back on and then charge the same turn if there was a unit there within medium. But because of the forests, it would take an extra activation to do that, because you can only go up to short and you can't deploy within short of an enemy warband per the scenario rules. So it kind of slowed down those hammers coming in. A lot of times with the endless warbands, you go in, smash a lot of phase, and then they bring on a unit, smashes some more phase. You bring on a unit to smash that unit's phase. They bring on a unit ad infinitum. But the Woods kind of slowed that down a bit, so it wasn't necessarily a no-brainer to bring in those hammers to rock people's socks off. It was a really close battle. John had the last turn, and going into it, it was pretty much a dead even, something like 16 or 17, maybe 18 slaughter points between us, and it might have been tied. So it came down to it. He had to eliminate a unit of warriors and then take out my warrior priest, who up until that point wasn't taken down. So in the end, he ended up doing that, but it was mainly due to a couple of mistakes that I made where it was my first game of the day. But basically, what I kind of like about Saga is the importance of order and the sequencing of things. So what I did as a mistake in that game was, for my warrior priest, I forgot to use his buffing ability in the orders phase. I allocated a dice for it, but I didn't kind of like burn it. Really isn't a good reason that you would ever do that, except I kind of put all my dice out there, and then I don't really start the turn until I'm happy with it. So I allocated a dice but never burned it, so the dice just kind of sat there. I had an extra warlord activation that I could have done, but so I didn't get that off, which made me not wipe out one of John's units. And then in the following turn, I had to fight with that unit again. So if I was buffed up, I could have killed that unit outright. But since I wasn't in the following turn, I had to go in and kill them, manually again. I'm not sure how you say that. But and then I gained a fatigue for that on both the warrior priest and then that unit of warriors. So in the last turn, John popped out his big unit of warriors to kind of hammer those guys. That was the weak point of the line because they had an extra fatigue when they shouldn't have, really, because I messed up earlier. And then he ended up wiping out that unit, and then he got into the warrior priest. He held around, and then he went in again, and then he just barely took him out. Well, I had a Saga dice on Brett Walda, which is the Anglo-Saxon defensive ability, which is super awesome. Gives you +1 armor and reroll defense dice, so he'd be super, super tough to take down if I just burned that ability. So it could have been a draw, but a couple lapses in judgment took the victory to John. So yeah, he definitely played well. It was awesome to play the Scots and kind of see how those guys work out, because the Scots, when you're starting out with Saga, one of the main kind of first, tactics or strategy that you would use is you can figure out if you can use all your Saga abilities on one unit and just hammer it in. You can wipe out units and you can do pretty good. You're not going to be doing bad by any stretch. But the Scots, they kind of have a perfect counter for that, or where they can load up their board with reactions, and then they can go in, and if you have that single big hammer unit, you go in and they can kind of match you tit for tat on attacks, and then to boot they have a crap load of defensive dice. So like they kind of they're doing what you do, but they also are soaking up a bunch of attacks with those defensive dice. So they're actually doing it better than you can. So it's kind of like banging your head against the wall, going up against the Scots. So it was kind of interesting, because then the counter then is you have to hit the Scots with multiple units, multiple activations. So they can't use all of their defensive abilities to counter all your attack abilities, or at least you get them to split them up, or you can kind of feint one way, try to get them to use the abilities to drop the hammer or make them hold it, try to get away with stuff. So that was really fun to play the Scots. I can't wait to get some games in against J-Jack and kind of explore that mechanic further. So that was a good game against John. Second game was against Hagen. He called me out, wanted a piece of the horn dog. Well, he got the whole thing. This one we played, I think it was Sacred Ground, and it was 3 hills in the middle. And on the right, we kind of just took a look at each other. I had my levy into the forest, and he had his guys kind of eyeing him up. On the other side, the far side, he moved up a unit of Hearthguard, and they got pounced by a full-strength unit of warriors and my warrior priest, which if I can get that combo in, it's a bucket load of attacks. Before any additional Saga abilities, it's 24 attacks, which is pretty darn good. That's berserker level of attacks. And you can boost that up further. You can get it up to 30 with some abilities and actually get quite a few defensive dice. So I kind of mutilated his unit. So I had that woods kind of firmly secured. In the middle, he had a lot of guys, and I had a levy and a warrior units with my warlord. And this was a super awesome slugfest. It was totally badass. We just had our units just bashing and bashing and smashing together. And finally, it was down to his warlord and my warlord. And we probably had gone back and forth with 3 or 4 duels at that point between them. And then we did probably 3 or 4 more without any troops backing us up. And you know how dicey that can be, and it was pretty awesome. So in his turn, I would pop Brett Walda, which is a super defensive ability for the Anglo-Saxons warlord, and kind of soak up all the attack abilities that he had. And then on his turn, he would fight defensive. I don't know if he had any extra defensive stuff, but the Saxons don't have much attack then, so it was kind of a perfect match for our attack and defense. And we went back 3 or 4 times. Finally, Elfin Raven Killer, my Anglo-Saxon warlord, took down Hagen's warlord, and we pretty much called it there. It was super fun, super dicey. There's a couple points where you kind of calling the other guy out and be like, come on, you want to play like a douche, don't hold back, go all in. And it was fun because we went all in, and like you didn't just kill the other guy, it kind of just ended up in a stalemate. So it was really fun when he called him out and they came in, or he did vice versa to me. And that was a super awesome game. Game 3, I played against Rick Viner, who's a staple of the Saga scene. He always shows up at Adepticon. I know Rick from the old Warhammer days and drinking many a beer with him in lacrosse in the mid-2000s. And he was playing, I think it was Vikings again. It was Vikings because he had Berserkers. We just played Kill the Warlord, and the table we were on was pretty cool. I had a couple buildings and then some vineyards type terrain pieces and rocky ground. So it was I remember a lot of short movement. I had issues of getting in my warriors. Usually what I do is I push up the levies. They soak up a lot of damage, kind of wear the enemy down, and then my warriors will kind of come in and be the hammer. And I know in this game it felt like the warriors weren't ever in striking distance because of the short moves as opposed to the medium moves being available. But this one was good. I remember it was a war of attrition. All my levy went down. Most of my warriors went down, but in the end I took out most of Rick's warriors as well, and then I think I took out the warlord in the end. So that was it. 1 loss, 2 wins for the Anglo-Saxon Brotherhood. I was on Team Sword, which there's Team Axe, Team Spear, Team Shield. I think we were tied for last, basically, which is there's 4 teams. Teams 3 and 4 were tied with the number of wins. You just counted up your wins, and then they kind of whatever the top 2 teams would kind of go head to head in the final scenario to see who could take it out. But one thing that was really awesome was in between these rounds, we would get to chow down on food that people brought, which was friggin' cool. And then also John brought these hammers, these throwing hammers for, I think, like the Highland games. So it's not like a little dinky throwing hammer type thing. The light one weighed like 12 pounds, and then I think a medium, I think that was the girl one actually, and then the other one was like 16 pounds, and they were like on, it was like a big weight on the end of a pole, and you kind of get out there, do 3, swing it around 3 times and just let her rip. So it was really fun seeing everybody whip these huge poles around, and it just seemed kind of themey. I'm curious if this sport dated back to the ancient, like Dark Ages times, if like this is something that people would have done in, I guess, Scotland or Ireland, wherever, in like 500 AD, if we were like recreating an ancient martial rite or something like that. That would have been awesome to know. If you know, let me know. I'm just curious about that. But at the end of the day, we're wrapping this baby up with a mega battle. And there's actually 2 mega battles, which is super cool. Double your fun. So on one table was the, I guess, number 1 seeded team based off wins. And they were going off, they were going to face off against the team with the most losses. And then on the other table was like the number 2 seeded team, whatever, and they were going against the number 3 pick. So I ended up playing on that board. I had 3 teammates. We had 2 Vikings and then a Militus Christi player. So we did have Crescent and Cross warbands there for sure. And we were going up against Anglo-Danes, Normans, and Vikings. Eric was playing, and then who was the other? I think another Vikings warband, if my memory serves correctly, which I'm sure it is. So On our table, the objective of the, I guess, kind of the winning type team was to burn this huge hall, which I think is a foreground hall. It's absolutely massive. Eric said it costs a couple $100, but it looks friggin' cool. And then on the opposite table, they were kind of going into a village, and their objective was to burn the ships. And yeah, this game was pretty fun. I'm not a huge fan of mega battles in any game system. Primarily Warhammer is what I have experience in, and I'm not a big fan of them. It feels like you're just kind of standing around a lot of the time, waiting for other people to do stuff. Now with Saga, it wasn't nearly as bad. It was pretty quickly paced. Probably, to be honest, not much longer than a normal game. There was some standing around, I felt like, and you kind of needed like a game master or somebody on deck to kind of keep things moving. Once your turn was over, you just kind of start BSing with whoever the heck was standing next to you, and eventually your entire team, your turn's over, but everyone's just chatting, and nobody knows that it's the other team's turn to go. So it could have benefited from a taskmaster on that regard. But yeah, this game was fun. It was cool. To the left of me, John, our Militus Christi, had a big unit of knights, and he was facing the Normans, which that guy had an awesome list. I think it was just 5 units of 8 warriors. And so it was huge. It looked like an old Warhammer army or an Ancients army or something like that, because he had 40 cavalry. So just a huge presence on the tabletop for Saga, which is super cool. And I'm not sure what plastics those were, but they're super dynamic, really cool looking. And they kind of went into John. He had some crossbows, so he's mowing them down. And then he had a big unit of Hearthguard with his warlord, and was kind of just taking all the punishment, all these units charging in, like one after the other. In front of me, I was kind of fighting 2 warbands, it looked like at first, but then the guy, one of them across from me, went into the main hall, so we kind of had 2 warbands fighting in the main hall. And the first turn of our game was really cool because we set up a unit of 12 Hearthguard in the hall, Viking Hearthguard, and then Hagen just moved up. He took a big unit of 12 Hearthguard as well, and just put them, basically moved up into the building the first turn. So the first combat was this huge 2 units of Hearthguard, and they were both Vikings, so they had all the abilities worked up, and it was a super bloodbath, and it was a little dicey, of course. That's how Saga is. That's why we love it. And I think Eric came out a little bit ahead, but it was really cool to see that huge fight going on. In the end, our team, they did burn the hall a bit, just a smidge. Couldn't stop that, but based purely off victory points, or slaughter points, I should say, we came out ahead. So the underdogs banded together and prevented the hall from burning down. So we did great there. On the other side, I think the underdogs also held out as well, I believe. So the underdogs took it. I don't know if there was an official decision between the underdogs to say who was better of the two, but yeah, it really wasn't necessary. We just had a blast. By that time it was dark. Everybody was kind of worn out. Everybody headed back. Hagen put us up at his place once again and basically wrapped up a nice Saga Storm. So if you want to join the Saga Storm next year, I assume that's probably fine with the organizers. I should say John is actually one of the main organizers of that. But you can join the Saga Storm Facebook group. Tell him you heard about it through this video so he knows you're not some random weirdo. Although the Saga Storm group is kind of like a Midwestern U.S. kind of based Saga group. So yeah, we welcome people from all over to get on there and chit-chat about their favorite Saga type things. And I think that's going to wrap it up. I've been rambling way too long. This is kind of freaking me out. But yeah, that's it. Like, favorite this shit. If you got a friend, who enjoys Saga, or you want them to enjoy Saga, send them some links to my Saga Thursday vids. Subscribe so you don't miss the next Saga Thursday video to come out. Become a hobby horn dog today, my friends. Saga!